You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the True Crime Never Sleeps podcast. I'm your host, Larry Elise, and we're continuing our series Beyond Borders. This week, we're diving into the Petrobras Scandal. And before we do, let us know your thoughts on the topics we cover in the comment section below. If there's something I got wrong, let me know. Something you disagree with, let me know. And with that, let's dive into today's episode. Petrobras Scandal, often associated with the larger investigation named Operation Car Wash, stands as one of the most significant corruption scandals in modern history. If you'd followed Brazilian politics or global business news over the last decade, you've probably heard about the dramatic twists and turns surrounding Petrobras, Brazil's state-controlled oil giant, and the convoluted network of bribery, political maneuvering, and money laundering that emerged. This scandal reached the highest corridors of power, ensnaring corporate executives, top-tier politicians, and global construction firms. While large-scale corruption isn't new to any government or industry, the magnitude and complexity of the Petrobras scandal captured worldwide attention for several reasons. First, itself is massive, emblematic of Brazil's economic might and a key symbol of national pride. Second, the scandal erupted at a time when Brazil was positioning itself as a leader among emerging economies, spotlighted by hosting events like the 2014 FIFA World Cup and the 2016 Summer Olympics. Third, the fallout deeply affected Brazil's political stability. Prominent officials faced allegations and convictions. Presidents were impeached, and the Brazilian public grew increasingly polarized and distrustful of political institutions. In a nutshell, the scandal is about how a web of bribery and money laundering operations diverted billions of dollars from Petrobras, implicating major engineering and construction companies, influential politicians, and other power brokers.
We're going to take a quick break from this episode, and I'd like to discuss my sponsor, NordVPN, a service that keeps me confident and secure every time I go online. If you're not familiar, a VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and NordVPN is one of the best out there for keeping your browsing activity under wraps. Why do I use NordVPN? First, it gives me total online privacy. When you connect to NordVPN servers, all your internet data is encrypted. That means snoopers, advertisers, and even your internet provider can't see your personal info or track your digital footprints. It's like having an invisible cloak for your online life. Second, NordVPN is awesome for unblocking geo-restricted content. Love streaming sports from overseas or catching up on that show that isn't available in your country yet? Just open NordVPN, pick a server from one of their thousands of locations worldwide, and boom, you'll have access to content you couldn't see before. Plus, with speeds faster than ever, you can stream in high definition without those pesky buffering interruptions. Now let's talk simplicity. NordVPN's app is super user-friendly. Whether you're on a phone, laptop, or tablet, you can connect with just one click. And if you ever get stuck, their customer support is there 24/7. Another big highlight, NordVPN has a no-logs policy, which means that they never track or store your data. Your digital world stays yours alone. Lastly, if you travel often like me, NordVPN really comes in handy. Whether you're on public Wi-Fi at airports, hotels, or coffee shops, your data is always at risk. But with NordVPN, you can safeguard your connection and keep hackers at bay. No more worrying about whether your coffee shop Wi-Fi is safe. So if you're serious about protecting your privacy, accessing global content, and just having peace of mind online, NordVPN is the way to go. Give it a try, and I promise you'll wonder why you waited so long. Hit the link in the description to learn more and grab a special deal. Stay safe out there and happy browsing with NordVPN. Now let's get back to the rest of our episode.
The story is vast, spanning secret Swiss bank accounts, harsh money, and carefully orchestrated false contracts. To understand how all these puzzle pieces fit together, let's start by exploring Petrobras itself, why it's so important to Brazil, and how something so monumental could be shaken to its core by corruption. Petrobras was founded in 1953 and is not just an ordinary oil company. For Brazilians, it's long been a point of pride and an emblem of national self-determination, especially after decades of political struggle over natural resource control. Petrobras is a semi-public corporation, meaning it has both private shareholders and the Brazilian government as its primary stakeholder. The government's controlling stake made Petrobras a policy tool that could help drive economic and social development, often by investing in large-scale projects, engaging in job creation, and ensuring that Brazil's oil wealth was, ideally, funneled back into the nation. Over the years, Petrobras distinguished itself as a leader in deep-water and ultra-deep-water oil extraction. It became a global player, entering various joint ventures and exploring overseas fields. This sheer scale turned the company into one of Latin America's largest businesses, with tens of thousands of employees and major contracts involving the most prominent engineering, shipbuilding, and service companies in the region. However, Petrobras' size, combined with its strong ties to government interests, made it an attractive landscape for corruption. Politicians, lobbyists, and corporate executives found ways to exploit the company's massive budgets and signing power. The perfect storm brewed when mega projects began rolling out, involving billions of dollars in investment. In the case of the Petrobras Scandal, what should have been infrastructural triumphs often turned into mediums for illegal profit. It's in these high-stakes, big-budget territories that the seeds of the scandal took root. Although the most explosive details came to light around 2014, the seeds of the corruption scheme behind the scandal trace back many years. The essential formula was surprisingly straightforward, despite its eventual complexity, and rested on three primary pillars. 1. Overpriced contracts. 2. Kickbacks. And 3. Of course, money laundering. This triangular system became self-reinforcing. Politicians who benefited from the kickbacks kept certain Petrobras executives in place, people who, in turn, ensured that friendly contractors continued to receive big, overpriced projects. Meanwhile, the construction firms stayed happy as they could maintain a steady pipeline of government-sponsored work at massive profits. It was a grand symbiosis, so deeply embedded in Brazilian business culture that many assumed it was just how things got done. The scale and boldness, though, took it to unprecedented levels. Over time, this arrangement ballooned, involving more key players, larger sums of money, and even an ever-growing risk. Ironically, the scandal's exposure would start with something relatively small: a separate investigation into money laundering at a local car wash in Brasilia, hence the eventual name, Operation Car Wash. And that thread would unravel a tapestry of corruption beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Operation Car Wash began humbly in early 2014 as a federal police probe into suspicious transactions linked to an unassuming gas station and car wash. The investigators soon discovered that the car wash was being used to move illicit funds. This initial foray opened up a Pandora's box. Some of these transactions were connected to currency dealers, which led detectives to follow a money trail tied to higher and higher echelons of business and government. The first big breakthrough occurred when law enforcement officials turned their attention to the dealings of Alberto Yusuf, a known money changer with a storied history in laundering schemes. As they scrutinized Yusuf's operations, they discovered he was funneling cash to corrupt officials and middlemen who had ties to Petrobras. That's when the scale of the scandal became clear to investigators. They saw that Yusuf was a crucial node in a vast network that connected top Petrobras executives, political party members, and large construction firms. Operation Car Wash quickly escalated, morphing from a localized money laundering investigation to a broad anti-corruption crusade. Excuse me. Judge Sergio Moro, a federal judge from the southern Brazilian city of Curitiba, apologies for butchering the name, emerged as a central figure. Known for his strong stance against corruption, Moro granted extensive plea bargains and authorized controversial preventive detentions to keep suspects talking. Several high-ranking Petrobras executives, alarmed by the possibility of lengthy jail sentences, decided to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced punishments. Each new confession provided more details and implicated more people. What had started as a fairly routine crime bust turned into a national drama. Television outlets broadcasted police raids early in the morning, and suspects were taken into custody, sometimes still wearing pajamas. The Brazilian public, meanwhile, watched in shock as each new revelation pointed to deeper and deeper, more systematic corruption. When the dust settled, it wasn't just Petrobras under the microscope. Several large Brazilian construction and engineering firms became primary suspects and were eventually proven to have actively participated in the bribery ring. Odebrecht, one of the largest engineering conglomerates in Latin America, was among the highest profile companies ensnared. Its CEO at the time, Marcelo Odebrecht, apologies if I'm saying that wrong, was eventually convicted of graft and money laundering. The investigations revealed that the company maintained a full-blown division of structured operations, which specialized in distributing bribe payments to politicians and intermediaries worldwide, not just in Brazil. Other major players included Camargo Correa, Andrade Gutierrez, Quiros Galveo, and Ngivix, among others. Many of these firms depended on lucrative contracts with Petrobras for building refineries, offshore platforms, and other large-scale projects. Given the enormous capital involved in these ventures, these companies were willing to pay huge sums under the table. The unwritten rule seems to be, if you wanted to do business with Petrobras, you had to play the game. The business model was as follows. Contractors colluded to rig bids on Petrobras projects, ensuring there was minimal real competition. They inflated their prices, got the contracts approved by insiders at Petrobras, who were rewarded with kickbacks, and then funneled a portion of the loot into political campaigns or slush funds. Everyone involved took a share of the spoils, except, of course, the Brazilian public, whose tax money was funding these projects. The result was a debacle for Brazil's economy. When the scandal broke, stocks for these construction firms plummeted. Petrobras itself saw its market value tumble dramatically. Foreign investors became weary, and rating agencies downgraded Brazil's credit rating, citing the corruption crisis and doubts about governance. Between 2014 and 2016, a series of arrests and plea bargain agreements began to paint a more detailed picture of the scandal. High-profile executives and former Petrobras directors were arrested. Many of them, in return for lenient sentences, started singing like canaries. Their testimonies revealed how the kickback scheme operated. Public bidding processes were rigged from the start, with secret pacts on who would win each Petrobras contract. The flow of illicit funds, paypacks range from cash in suitcases to transfers in offshore accounts. Some transactions were bizarre, individuals storing money in physical vaults or even in everyday storage units to avoid leaving a digital paper trail. Executives disclosed the involvement of high-ranking politicians from multiple parties, detailing code words, code names for bribe recipients, and even complex organizational charts mapping out who got what share. The car wash task force was relentless. Judge Sergio Moro's strategy of pretrial detention, criticized by some as excessively forceful, but it did generate a cascading effect of cooperation. The more people cooperated, the more new suspects were named. By 2015, Operation Car Wash had become an unstoppable juggernaut. Public sentiment was strongly supportive of the investigations, seeing them as a cleansing force in the Brazilian political landscape. But as investigations continued, the scope surpassed Petrobras itself. Similar corruption patterns were discovered in other states, enterprises, and government ministries. Operation Car Wash effectively put a magnifying glass on Brazil's entire political economy, driving conversations about the structural reforms, accountability, and the very nature of democracy in Latin America's biggest nation. All the while, Dilma Rousseff, who served as president of Brazil from 2011 to 2016, faced escalating pressure. Though the formal reasons for her impeachment centered on budgetary manipulations, it's impossible to separate the broader environment of the scandal from the impeachment drama. Rousseff had been chairperson of Petrobras' board of directors before becoming president. though she was not directly charged with corruption within the car wash investigations. Still, critics argued she should have known or acted to stop the wrongdoing. On the political stage, Rousseff's impeachment in 2016 was a watershed moment, leading many Brazilians to believe the scandal had fundamentally weakened the presidency. Rousseff's party, the PT, claimed that her impeachment was a coup orchestrated by rivals eager to protect their own skins from corruption probes. Opponents countered that Rousseff's removal was a necessary response to her government's mismanagement and concealment of finances. Regardless, the rancor surrounding her ouster reflected a deeply divided society with half the population celebrating and the other half fuming in protest. The scope of the Petrobras scandal was so vast that it inevitably spilled beyond Brazilian borders. Numerous companies ensnared in the scandal had substantial global operations, and the money laundering spanned different jurisdictions. As a result, foreign law enforcement agencies, including the U.S. Department of Justice, became involved. For example, Odebrecht signed a plea deal in which it admitted to having paid hundreds of millions of dollars in bribes in multiple countries, from Peru to Angola. With the DOJ's involvement, both Petrobras and several Brazilian companies faced hefty fines under U.S. anti-bribery laws. Petrobras, listed on the New York Stock Exchange, was subject to strict regulations under the U.S. SEC. Ultimately, Petrobras had to pay billions in settlements. The scandal also rocked political establishments in countries like Peru, Colombia, and the Dominican Republic. Politicians across Latin America, Africa, and beyond found themselves under scrutiny for receiving illicit payments in exchange for awarding contracts or to Brazilian corporations implicated in Operation Car Wash. All these developments underscored the scandal's true global dimensions. It wasn't just a Brazilian phenomenon. It was a cautionary tale about how corruption can become systemic, crossing national boundaries, when there's a lot of money on the table and weak checks and balances. For the average Brazilian citizen, the scandal represented not only a massive breach of trust, but also a direct economic blow. As public funds were funneled into crooked deals, the government had fewer resources for social projects and infrastructure improvements. The revelations of corruption also shook investor confidence, contributing to a downturn in Brazil's economy. The country entered a deep recession around 2015, with unemployment rates climbing and the currency losing value against the US dollar. In the public sphere, massive protests erupted in major cities like Rio de Janeiro. Citizens marched, held signs demanding justice, and chanted for the removal of corrupt politicians. These protests were notable for their mix of social classes and political affiliations. While not everyone agreed on the specifics of the solutions, some wanted immediate impeachment of the president, others wanted a complete overhaul of the political system. There was a shared outrage that corruption had become so embedded in the core of Brazil's institutions. Critically, the scandal also prompted discussions about personal ethics and civic responsibility. Brazilians began engaging in more direct questioning of politicians' platforms, calling for greater transparency and accountability. There was a collective sense that something had to change, not just within the government, but throughout the entire societal framework that allowed such brazen corruption to thrive. With public opinion largely behind it, Car Wash Task Force gained momentum in pushing the Brazilian judiciary to modernize certain legal mechanisms. Plea bargaining, relatively underused in Brazilian courts before Operation Car Wash, became a powerful tool. High-profile defendants cut deals by revealing criminal details, exposing new participants in the scandal, and explaining the inner workings of the corruption networks. However, as the investigations expanded, political pushback intensified. Critics accused the judge and the car wash prosecutors of overreach and partisanship. Some alleged they were selectively targeting left-leaning political figures, while conservative or centrist politicians with ties to powerful interests seemed to receive lenient treatment. Moreover, the extended use of pretrial detentions and the release of leaked phone calls raised ethical and constitutional concerns. These controversies fueled debates about the limits of judicial activism and the necessity of due process. Despite the controversies, the legislative branch tried, sometimes succeeded, to pass reforms that would curb the independence of car wash investigations. Excuse me. The scandal played a significant role in the rise of Jair Bolsonaro, a right-wing populist who won the presidency in 2018. Bolsonaro campaigned on a law and order platform, presenting himself as an outsider who would crack down on corruption. He appointed Judge Moro as his Minister of Justice, an appointment that both thrilled his supporters and fed suspicions among critics who believed the car wash team had favored his president's campaign. In office, the government faced its own corruption accusations, and Moro eventually resigned in 2020, claiming interference in high-profile investigations involving Bolsonaro's associates. Still, the political climate in Brazil had permanently shifted. Voters demanded greater accountability, even as political polarization soared to new heights. By the early 2020s, car wash lost some of its steam and political pressures, internal conflicts, and decisions by higher courts that scaled back the investigation. Many of the original prosecutors left the task force, and Judge Moro transitioned to the political sphere, and then back to the legal arena. Still, it would be a mistake to say car wash or the Petrobras scandal is entirely over. Investigators continue in various branches of the judiciary, and new allegations related to the scandal surface periodically. Its legacy is imprinted on the Brazilian public consciousness, influencing how Brazilians think about corruption and governance. Despite the passage of several years since Operation Car Wash burst onto the scene, new chapters continue to unfold. Some high-profile convictions have been overturned on procedural grounds, and critics argue these reversals undermine anti-corruption efforts. Others say these decisions reflect necessary corrections in a system that overstepped and compromised defendants' rights. At the same time, fresh investigations, offshoot inquiries keep revealing additional layers of corruption, both within Petrobras and beyond. Brazilian prosecutors have collaborated with counterparts in places like Switzerland and the United States to track the flow of illicit funds and freeze suspect accounts. These international partnerships suggest that the anti-corruption movement won't easily fade away. From a societal perspective, the hope is that the Petrobras scandal will leave a lasting legacy of institutional reform. While some cynics contend that corruption is so deeply ingrained in Brazilian politics that no single scandal can uproot it entirely, there's also a sense of cautious optimism that the exposes have permanently altered the political and economic landscape. Voters, investors, and journalists are more alert, and the judiciary has gained both new tools and new scrutiny in its battle against corruption. The Petrobras scandal is not just the story about one company or even one country. The sprawling narrative that involves billions of dollars, powerful political figures, transnational corporate behemoths, and a seismic upheaval of public trust. From the early seeds of overinflated contracts to the international fallout involving U.S. authorities. The scandal laid bare a corruption machine that operated with impunity at the highest levels of government and business. Its repercussions have been massive. Politicians toppled, executives jailed, presidents impeached, or nearly so, and Brazil's economic might shaken to the core, all outcomes of a system that for years normalized unethical practices. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, something else emerged, an energized civic consciousness. Brazilians took to the streets, voiced their dissent, and demanded accountability. Investigative journalism thrived, and the judiciary tested the boundaries of its power to bring the corrupt to justice, albeit not without controversy and accusation of bias. In the end, the Petrobras scandal is more than a dark chapter in Brazilian history. It's a case study in how democracy grapples with powerful forces of greed, how justice can be both messy and transformative, and how public outrage can catalyze real change, at least for a while. Whether Brazil can sustain that momentum imposes lasting reforms and reclaim public trust in its democratic institutions is a story still being written. For now, the Petrobras Scandal stands as a warning of what happens when transparency and accountability are pushed aside, but also as a testament to the resilience of a society determined to confront and potentially dismantle the machinery of corruption. Let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comment section below. Do you think Brazil will ever recover from this scandal? And do you think this kind of stuff is still going on in the United States or in whatever country you guys are watching from? Let me know. Of course, give us a thumbs up if you like our video. Hit that subscribe button down below. Hit the bell notification button to be notified of our next episode. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We will see you next time.